Yeah. So let's get started. Just to introduce myself, my name is Matt. I am an educational psychologist in Wandsworth. So today I'm hoping to talk to you about the social graces as a tool for reflection within our profession. Hopefully many of you will know the social graces, be used to them. So I'll go into a very brief, very brief history as to kind of where they came from, how they developed. But a lot of this will be kind of exploring my own experiences of the graces, why I think they're important, and how we can use them. Sorry. Okay. So the social graces kind of came about through Burnham in the 1980s. So this followed a general trend order, moving away from first order kind of cybernetics to second order cybernetics. I won't go into much detail, but this followed the idea that as professionals, we aren't separate from the systems we work with. So prior to this, the expert, the EP in our case, or in Burnham's case, the family therapist, would sit outside of therapy, as it were, looking in, making judgments, making explanations and understandings. However, as the 80s came about and this developed into the 90s, this moved away from this idea to the understanding that as professionals, we are intrinsically part of these systems. So who we are and what makes us up is then linked to those kind of professional networks and boundaries, and will be impacting on those relationships. But essentially, who we are affects the relationships we have, the work we do, and the understanding. So as a way for them to kind of explore these and to kind of support therapists and later on other professionals in recognizing their own input into these, he came up with the social graces. These have developed over time and are constantly added to and adapted, but make up different parts of areas we can reflect, we can look at, and we can understand ourselves. So on the screen, I've put quite a nice image of what the graces are at the moment, just to give you a little idea of what this looks like. But I suppose the question I have is, if this is an idea, we know that who we are affects our interactions and the work we do. Why is it important to us? So there's lots going on in the world at the moment. We have Brexit, we have kind of the refugee crisis in Greece, in Calais. Pride Month was last month. We have the Black Lives Matter movement going forward. And it's kind of, I've put these up because it's so important to reflect who we are. I won't go into much detail, and if people are interested, there's a fantastic webinar, hopefully going to broadcast by Beep, about whiteness in educational psychology. And I think you can sign up with Eventbrite to look at that. But there's something we all hear in kind of the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's kind of the response, well, all lives matter. And you kind of have to think, well, obviously all lives matter, but that's not the point really, is it? We're focusing on this because for many of us, we are in positions of privilege. We are in positions where who we are gives us certain rights, gives us certain advances over other people, whether that's right or wrong. It puts us into positions of privilege, and we need to be able to recognize those to then be able to drive change and to drive positive action for those around us. And I think that the social graces are a really, really helpful way to kind of look at those look at some of those aspects of who we are, recognize actually I am potentially privileged in this area, I'm competent in this area, but actually there are others I just don't know about. So just to start with today, I thought I'd have an activity for us. So please do go into the chat and just write down what makes up the average EP. So on your screens, I have Dr. EP. I realize a skeleton's perhaps not it's not as, hopefully not as scary as it may look. But the idea is, if we take away everything that gives us clues, what elements make up the stereotypical EP? If you think of an EP, what kind of features, physical or traits, come to mind? Mhm. So yep, we got female, educated, white, middle class, white female, white female, empathy, compassion, white, middle class. And yeah, I think this is generally the concept of our profession. Your average EP, the idea is a white, middle class, educated female. And perhaps what comes with that, if you consider what makes up a general female, then you get the empathy, you get the compassion, you get the listening, because that's what women are really good at stereotypically. And so when we think, if this is the general idea of an EP, it's going to be a white, middle class, well-educated lady, what impression does that give to schools? If not only if we kind of fit that construct, but also if we don't, what image does it give to a young person if they kind of think, okay, I'm going to meet with a psychologist, it's going to be someone middle-aged, middle class, female, they can talk to me about what's wrong. What does that present about ourselves, and how do we either consciously or unconsciously kind of fit in with that bias and work with it? So along with these different elements, we also have the visible and the invisible, the voiced and the unvoiced. So this reflects those elements of the social graces for ourselves, which can be seen or which can't be seen, and which we're able to talk about. So this is going to differ for everyone, for each person. Some elements may be more visible. So if we look at kind of appearance, if we look at religion, we have things like crucifixes, hijabs, those sorts of things. If you look at even geography, there's stereotypical accents, we may have flags, we may have football kits. But even then, can we make assumptions? So for example, some things which may be very obviously visible to us may not be actually visible or voiced to the individual. So if we consider things such as gender, look at gender identity, or race and ethnicity, when we look at people, we make snap judgments, whether these are right or wrong, about what we expect, what we believe. But without kind of these being voiced by the individual, we can never truly know what that means, what that looks like, and how it's understood by them. So I just want to do a quick exercise with me. So if we look at this for me, as an example, if we look at the invisible, the invisible, the voiced, and the unvoiced. So some of the things that are very visible, potentially, I am male. When I speak, you can possibly tell I'm from the South. You may believe there is a level of education. And interestingly, education, I find, is one of these invisible, visible, unvoiced, voiced ones on the spectrum, because you may look at someone like me and go, oh, okay, you know, he speaks okay, he's probably got an education. But then we put things. So on my title, I have put on that little doctor. There's 2 letters. And suddenly this goes from being invisible to voiced. It's something we can talk about, something we can name. And if we go back to our Dr. EP, the idea as well, with all new EPs at least, there has to be a level of education to a doctorate level. And what does that tell us about people? But kind of keeping going back to myself, we have these identities. What else is visible? What else is voiced? And there's one which I want to talk about, which is kind of very important to me, and that's sexuality. Now, for anyone who's kind of heard me talk at a conference or has met me, and if you went to my secondary school, anyone who's even looked at me, I'm passionate about gender, sexuality, and these ideas. But this is kind of where things, the social graces can differ in terms of not only across individuals, in terms of what's visible and invisible, voiced and unvoiced, but across the self. So as I said, it's something I talk about a lot because it's something I'm very passionate about, that equality and rights for LGBT youth. But just looking at me, unless of course, as I said, you went to my secondary school, it's you may not immediately say, oh, well, you know, that person, their sexual identity is the same or different to mine. However, across the year, this may change. So at Pride parades, I might go out with a nice rainbow flag painted on my cheek. I might put some rainbow laces in my shoes. So across time, for each individual, these elements of themselves will change. And this is why we have a scale, because for everyone, these will matter. If we look at, going back to our previous idea, employment, I think, is one of these ones that's really quite obvious how this changes. Consider professions where there's a uniform, nurses, people in restaurants, policemen. Sometimes we look at them and it's quite easy to tell what that employment level is because there's a uniform that shares this with us. Other times, out of that, it can be different. But will that oneness aspect affect the way we look at someone and the way we work with them or we judge them? Okay, so I won't ask you to put this in the chat, but I'd like to just take a minute or two just to kind of look at the social graces and reflect. What elements of those do you think that comprise you? What's important to you? What do you think may change? What is visible to others? What's invisible? What can we talk about? What can't we talk about? I like this idea of the voiced and the unvoiced because I think this is really important, really interesting. There are some things that are very visible we just maybe don't talk about. For example, to all of you out there, it's, I imagine, extremely obvious that I'm devilishly handsome, but we wouldn't bring that up in kind of conversation. And why is that? What part of that makes things okay? What part of it doesn't? So just take a moment just to reflect, actually, looking at these, what makes up you? What makes up who you are? What makes up your identity? Are there things that are visible to others? Other things are invisible to others? Are there areas you talk about, you're happy to talk about? Other areas that actually think, I wouldn't talk about this with someone? Okay. So, and I think reflecting on that is a great opportunity to kind of look at the work of Totsuka and of what grabs you with the graces. So Totsuka did some supervision work with some therapists and asked the question, which of the graces grab you? If you were to look at them, which two to you are the most important? But at the same time, there was the question, okay, which two don't grab you? Are there areas here which aren't important to you, or that you just maybe look over for other things? And I think this is something we actually really need to be aware of. What do we look over? Now, Totsuka kind of highlights this may be because it's something we don't have experience with, or it may be because we have experience, but this has been negative, so we want to avoid it. We want to not talk about it, not look at that. But then, is this just ignoring the elephant in the room at times? Now, I'm not saying that we should kind of look at this and then name all of them when we see them in situations. But I think we need to be confident in exploring things which maybe we aren't confident in ourselves. And throughout my work, I find myself asking the question, and what does that mean to you? There are some things I don't have experience of. There are some things I don't know through lack of experience, through lack of kind of just those chances. But just because we don't kind of view them as important aspects of our identity doesn't mean they're not important aspects of another's identity. So it's recognizing these and being important to admit this is something that I'm not confident in, and saying, actually, what does that mean to you? Why is this important? What does that mean? So we can build this trust and this shared knowledge. And I think this leads on to the work that we do very, very nicely. So not only what we are drawn to, but what others see in us, and what this means for the young people we work with. As we know, especially adolescence is hugely important in forming identity in young people. And that's going to be influenced by all manners of their environment, their home, their school, their friends, what's going on in the world. We looked at kind of the quintessential EP, that stereotypical EP, that white, middle class female. But can we think of our stereotypical student that we work with? And I don't think we can. No matter where we are in the UK, I work in Southwest London, and the population there is going to be not only different across the borough, but very different to the population in Norfolk or the population in Glasgow. There will be certain areas which are more important, and we have to kind of recognize those and understand those. But for every young person, there's going to be elements which are important to them, which make up their identity, make up who they are. And that's going to be reflected in our interactions and their own understanding of the world. So I just want to take a quick side step and talk about my my thesis to kind of bring this to light. My doctoral work was looking at the positive school experiences of secondary school transgender young people. And one of the quotes that I always remember came from a participant called Kurt. And he was talking about access to bathrooms. And he said something like, it's no big deal. I get to use this. And I raised him on this and said, it doesn't sound like it's no big deal. And he turned around and said something on the lines of, well, I know it's not. I know it's a big deal. And I know that you know it's a big deal. That's because you know what it's like. You understand me. Other people don't. But you're right. It was huge. Now, this really struck me. I will likely never know what it's like to be a trans young person. And I kind of raised this to Kurt at the end. And I said, it was really interesting that you said, I know what it's like. And he turned around and said, but you do, Matt, you do know what it's like. Just because we haven't had the same experiences, just because we haven't had the same life, doesn't mean you don't know what this feels like. Most of my participants, I recruited them in an LGBT youth group. I'd been there for just under a year. I was very open there, talking about my own experiences at school, what they meant for me. And for Kurt, it was that sense of community. Even though we were different in one sense, actually we were very much the same. We had that shared knowledge, that shared experience, and we're both passionate about the same things. So for him, it was very much actually this is important to me, and it's important to you. So that's what we need to kind of work on. You know that. And it really kind of struck me that this is true. We will all have our own experiences, what drives us, what motivates us, what's important to us. And it's finding those interactions, finding how we can use our privileges to support others, and recognizing where we maybe have privilege that we don't recognize, or we have areas that we just aren't as aware of, and kind of owning those and saying, this is something that I don't know. Please tell me more, or why is that important to you? Or looking further. I mean, hopefully that's why many of you are here, is because we recognize we are in those positions. We are looked up in schools. We are seen as the external expert that comes in and fixes things in schools. But the entire idea of the GRACES is that no, we aren't these external experts who come in objectively, look and solve. We are part of these systems. We are part of these families, these groups, and who we are will affect those relationships, affect the work that goes on, and affects how we understand the world and how those young people understand us. And it's how we acknowledge this, how we recognize this in ourselves, how we look at these different elements of what makes us up, what we share with others, what we don't share with others, what others can see, what they can't see. And asking the question, what privilege does this give me? What does this mean for who I am and what I am able to provide for this situation? And just looking back and kind of asking ourselves, okay, and now how can I develop myself further? Thank you. So I've just put some reading on here. The Mark Fox paper looks at the first order and second order cybernetics if people are more interested, but I hope today has kind of given you an opportunity just to reflect actually who we are, what makes us, and what is important to us, and how we can use this kind of to go forwards. Thank you. Cool. Yes. One way. Yeah. Okay. 2 questions so far. So I've been asked, have I used social graces in supervision? And are there any exercises that have been helpful to support this? So interestingly, the social graces were first introduced to me in supervision and in one of my services as working groups following our team day. And I think the most helpful exercise I can think of is that raised by Totsuka, is asking yourself what's important to you. And this generally are those things that may make up those key aspects of your identity. So for me, for example, those most important things that grab me might be kind of sexuality, sexual identity, and gender, because this is things that I'm passionate about, and I recognize that I look out for, and I kind of try my best to kind of work with. But then it's that second question I think is possibly the most helpful to support discussion, is that what doesn't grab you? Because I think just as important as it is to kind of recognize what we're drawn to, I think the most important thing is kind of looking over, okay, what things maybe I say, this is important, but not as important. Because then it's the question of why. Why isn't this element as important as any other? Why is this element, maybe I don't see it as important as that? Because we must recognize that for each people, every element will be different in terms of their importance, what they're drawn to. So for us kind of saying, I don't think this one is as important, it's kind of asking ourselves, why is that? And then exploring ways where, okay, maybe I think this is the most important for me, but what might this mean for somebody else? What might this mean for the young person I'm working with? What influence could that have on their life that maybe I'm seeing or I'm not seeing, or that we can talk about? So I think that's probably the most important question that I've had. Okay, another one. Yeah, so it's the idea of that, yeah, my first thought for this person was that, well, all of them are important, but it's about seeing which one we're drawn to and what can be limited, or how that may limit things, and be aware of our own biases. And I think this is very true, because I suppose as EPs, the idea is that, yes, we're passionate about many things. That idea of social justice is kind of intrinsic in all of us in a sense, and it's the idea that we want to support others. So in that sense, yes, all of them likely will be important to us, will be kind of driving us. So then, as I said, is this kind of blinding our own biases? Because they're all important. We want to positive change. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is that idea of we may not be aware. So I think it is, as you kind of said, kind of answering it, it's look at them, and maybe as an exercise, go away and rank them. Just sit down with a list and put them in order of importance. Because then you may not be saying, well, I'm not drawn to that because I think they're all important. But that activity of kind of listing all of them in order of importance, because actually, okay, why is this easier for me to put this one appearance higher or lower? Is it kind of, why have I put employment kind of here on the list? What separates it from geography and appearance? Why does that matter? So yeah. So we have another one, kind of thinking about all the overlaps. So stereotypical EP age, gender, how we are positioned, and how they simultaneously influence how we position ourselves to colleagues, school staff, and most importantly, the young people we work with. How we kind of reveal ourselves to clients and its connection, so how we reveal something to ourselves to clients and its connection to power relationships. Now, I think this is really, really interesting because we do position ourselves. And I find this idea of EP age interesting because as a profession, we kind of, as we discussed, we look at this idea of the stereotypical EP as a white, middle class, middle-aged female. But actually, I'd put it to you that as a profession, we are getting younger and younger. And yet the image of the stereotypical middle-aged, middle-class white female kind of persists. But as we know, the EP profession is at retirement age, and we are getting younger and younger. But still, this image persists. So what does that mean, as you said, to those relationships with schools and young people? And I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering this correctly, but I think I said, how do we reveal ourselves? It's just what we're comfortable with. I'd never suggest kind of saying things, sharing things that we wouldn't be comfortable sharing anyway. As I said, I don't march into my schools with a rainbow flag, slam it down on the table, and say, "I'm gay. Let me help all your gay children," because it's not something that would be helpful. No bulldozer there. But when it's raised, I mean, one of my schools had, they were explaining in a planning meeting that they were looking for support because one of their young people was transitioning. So this is when I said, this is my research. This is what I'm passionate about. That point, they knew who I was, yeah, well, grammar, it's too early, warnings. They knew me and what made me me, but it's that idea of actually sharing what we're comfortable with when it's relevant. So now in my service, often I'm the person people talk to if there is a young person who identifies as transgender, to say actually what mornings is there any advice you can give? And actually I kind of turn around and say, I mean, this is my experience, but what's your experience? What does it mean to you? What can you do? And I think all of us have this inside ourselves, this idea of this importance and this leveling. And I think exploring that sharing, how do we share? Because I think, as I said earlier, it's okay not to know, and just exploring. And that's the kind of idea of pupil voice and why we work with young people, because it's all great talking to schools and to parents and saying what is little Johnny good at? What is little Johnny kind of struggling with? What does Janie like? What does Janie kind of dislike? But we work with young people because we want to know what's important to them, what life means to them. And I think, as kind of Jane has said in the comments, it's curiosity is the key. Being happy to say, I don't know much about that. Tell me more, because that shows that we're listening. It shows that we care, and it shows that we want to know about that young person and support them. There are wonderful times when I've been in consultations and it's kind of been a young person's kind of been quiet. I said, "What do you like?" And they've gone, "Oh, video games." I'm like, "Which games do you play?" "Oh, Skyrim." "Great. I have a Khajiit player that I really like, and I really like going down to Faldmere." And then the eyes light up because it's someone who's listening and someone who kind of understands. But at the same time, I've had people kind of say, "Oh, video games. What do you play?" And they go, "Oh, Dota." And I'm like, "I've never played this." What do you do? Is that kind of the battle royale simulation? And it's the same response, whether I have the experience of Skyrim, of which I have lots, or whether I don't. It's that idea of just wanting to know more, identifying where we position ourselves, our knowledge, our understanding, and being open to learning. So kind of a final question, what happens if you bring the question of the graces to the young person and parent, and they are unwilling to talk about it? I think this is really key, because I think, right, there are some things, as we look at the voice and the unvoiced kind of spectrum, there are things we're comfortable talking about and we can raise, and there are other things that we can't talk about, or people don't want to talk about. And I think part of this is kind of how we position ourselves. I don't think anyone should be pressured into saying things they don't want to. But I wonder, and I wonder what you take away from this, is the act of naming it itself can be a sign of being listened to, being understood. So even if it's something that they don't want to talk about, if you're noticing it and naming it, what impact is that kind of giving? Is it pause for reflection? Now, I wonder in some cases whether this theoretically could go both ways. There's the sense that, actually, they've named something that I don't like, so I'm going to disengage. And I think that is a possible outcome. But I think as well, it gives that chance to reflect. And I think if there are things that we are noticing and highlighting that aren't being talked about, I think bringing it in with the frame of the graces can be helpful, using the opportunity to kind of reflect. So let's say, as an example, it is the idea of employment. We know that from the young person that parent has lost a job. We might say, if we need to kind of bring this up, how things are going at home, for example, what impacts are having on relationships, we could bring up in concept of the social graces, kind of say this is a tool that we use to reflect on elements that make us up. And I'm wondering, this has happened, what does that mean to you? How has it affected you? And actually, instead of kind of just naming it, being able to say, actually, this is something that we're doing as well. It may make it easier to talk about, knowing that it's not just not that it ever would be, but not a judgment statement, but rather part of practice. I'd wonder what that may help. When EPs are working with those people most concerned with an issue to help them to impact change for children and young people, how can we raise awareness of the importance of the graces for all? And I think, hopefully I'm getting this right, it's the sense that if we're working with someone who's kind of focused on one element, how can we work with them to support and understand all of the graces? And I wonder whether it's a similar thing, kind of naming it and saying, okay, this is really important. What other elements could be impacting this? What other elements could be going on that is having a similar or counter effect in their lives? And bring it in. So the final question is kind of, have I used or taught social graces in schools, and how did I do this? So I think this ties into the last things I've talked about, and it's I haven't taught it in schools, but relating to the last one, I raised it once in a planning meeting where I think I was talking about a young person, and there was one element of their life that they were kind of saying, this is having a significant impact, this. And I raised the idea of the graces. So this is something that we do. What else could be going on? What other influences are there going on in this young person's lives, and how is that impacting on not only the element that you're raising, but their general impact? Are there compounding influences? Are there protective factors? How can we work these? Because I think that's something that's, there's an awareness in school, but not always talking about it, and that's those protective factors. What's important to us that we build on? So going back to myself, for example, as you probably guessed by the comments in secondary school, and I said, anyone who's known me, I've chatted many times about it. I had a horrible time in school with my sexuality and my identity in that sense. But now that's very much a protective element of who I am, because that sense of community, that sense of safety. And I talk about it now, and I share it, and I work with others. And this goes back to what Kurt was saying in my research. He was saying, we haven't had the same experiences, but I know that you know what I mean, and I know that you know what it's like. And it's that sense that not only can things be compounding, be concerns, but actually at the same time, they can be the strengths, can be protective factors. And how we use those and how we interpret them in terms of what else is going on is hugely important. So I think in schools, do bring them to planning meetings and kind of say, even if it isn't a self-reflection, but these are some of the different elements that make up someone, I am sorry about grammar this morning, just it's early mornings. But that idea of taking them to school and say, these are some of the different elements. We've talked about kind of education for this young person, and you want me to kind of hit them on the head with a bass, sure. But what else is going on in their life? What else is impacting them, and how can we understand that and support them everywhere? Okay. I believe that was the last question. Yes. Thank you everyone for coming and for listening, taking the time this morning. It's been really nice kind of having you hear. Your comments and your questions are really helpful. And I hope this has been a really kind of helpful opportunity just to reflect, to kind of recognize, what is important to me and what can I be more curious about. Thank you. Thank you everyone for the comments.